Sometimes, despite doing all the things right, we still find ourselves in a health crisis. Today, I'm speaking with Dawn Landry, author of the book Armored, about her experiences as a caregiver for her very health-minded husband who suffered 3 major health crises. Stick around. Hey there, I'm Amy.Connell. Welcome to Graced Health, the podcast for women who want simple and grace-filled ways to take care of themselves and enjoy a little chocolate in the process, which I know we're all enjoying right now during the holiday season. I'm a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach who wants you to know your eating, movement, and body don't have to be perfect. You just need to be able to do what you're called to do. One of my favorite podcasts is Everything Happens with Kate Bowler. I have learned so much from this podcast, especially as it relates to grief and hard things and just relating to people who are going through that as well. One of the things she mentions at the beginning of her show is sometimes tough things happen for no reason at all. Today's story is one of those. I'm speaking with Dawn Landry and her experience of being a caregiver, or as she calls it, a care coach, to her husband for not 1, not 2, but 3 separate times. The last one was a stroke that left him paralyzed on the right side of his body. We talk about very applicable ways to support others who are going through a health crisis, ways to help patients in their recovery, and the importance of paying attention to those God whispers. Dawn has spent half of her 27-year career in the corporate real estate industry and is founder and CEO of Authenticity, LLC. She's an independent business-to-business growth strategist and a Gallup certified Clifton Strengths coach, which we talk about. And that was really instrumental in how she related to her husband, Darren, and encouraging him. So anyway, she provides consulting, training, and coaching services that optimize teams' engagement and productivity. Now, before we bring Dawn on, I do have a question. Do you ever feel shame because you're not following all the so-called healthy or the rules of healthy living? Would you like to break some of these rules with me? Because I'm breaking them. My new free download combats several health rules we've heard, and then it also gives you a bonus one to keep. Get yours at gracedhealth.com/bad rules. Okay, let's bring on Dawn. Dawn, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the Graced Health podcast.
Thank you, Amy. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, I met you through Forward, a Christian professional women's organization that has just done so much. And I know Forward was really integral in your own faith and in your own story as you were helping your husband, Darren. So what I wanted to do, one thing I'm working on, by the way, Dawn, is I feel like I bring the guests on and then I do a lot of talking for a minute. So listeners, I really apologize that I'm doing this. But you and your husband, Darren, have, from a medical perspective, been through the ringer. Do you think that that's a true statement?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like those cases of, don't ask for any more, but like, okay, God, you can kind of move on down the road. We have enough.
Yeah, totally. So I just kind of want to set the stage to the conversation that we'll be having today. Your husband, Darren, is the epitome of taking care of his temple. I mean, ate right, spent a lot of time at the gym. I mean, just did all of the right things. And yet God had some extra special plans, I guess we can call it. So in 2002, he suffered from Guillain-Barré. Did I pronounce that correctly?
It's pronounced Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Guillain-Barré. Okay, sorry about that syndrome. And I'm going to have you explain that in just a second. And then in 2009, he was diagnosed with stage 4 squamous cell carcinoma. And then in 2019, he suffered a pretty debilitating stroke, which is a lot for one person who takes a lot, really good care of himself to handle.
Yeah. So in looking at it, it could be a lot. However, I'm convinced that because he took such good care of himself, that when he had all of these major medical battles, he was armored and actually knew how to fight because he knew his body so well.
Oh, that's a really great point. Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think we do hear that. I actually had a guest on a couple weeks ago who talked about gynecological cancer, and she was saying the same thing, that women who are really in tune with their bodies can typically withstand treatment a little bit better because of the same reason. So, for those who are not familiar with Guillain-Barré, can you explain what that is just a little bit? And maybe let's just go through each of the things and go into a little bit more detail of the specifics.
Yeah, and if I could set the stage too, it's not like he is 82 years old and had all of these things happen to him. The Guillain-Barré actually affected him when he was 31 years old. And so that was the first major battle. He's been an asthmatic since he was 6 weeks old. And so the Guillain-Barré is basically a syndrome. It's very, very, it's like one in, I don't know how many million chance that you could have it. And of course he did. And, but basically they put him on this new drug. The body went into attack mode. It started to attack the medicine for what the medicine was doing as a side effect. They got him off of the drug. His body stayed in attack mode, and it was just basically attacking itself. And just as a sidebar, I was watching on 60 Minutes on Sunday. There's something called long hauler syndrome. That's so for people that are younger in age from a COVID standpoint, that may have had just a mild case of COVID where their body went into attack mode. They got over the COVID, but it's continuing to stay in attack mode. Not related to Guillain-Barré, but there's some similarities overall. The Guillain-Barré was the extreme though, because basically it was staying into such an attack mode that if they wouldn't have caught it in time, he would have gone into a full-blown coma. Here's the God miracle in all of this, is that there were 1 in 4 like trial kind of machines in the entire United States. Fortunately, we live in Houston, Texas, the Texas Medical Center of the world. And the one hospital that he chose to go to had one of those 4 machines in it. And he was willing to do this trial experiment whereby they did what's called plasmapheresis. And they went into his femoral artery, washed all of his blood, repurposed it, basically recycled his blood and his platelets, put it all back in his system. And he spent 5 days in ICU. And then he was fortunately, it worked, and he did not go into the coma. And so that's kind of it. And there's a lot of other implications that go into it. I learned during that lesson at that young of an age, because I also was 31 years old, that the internet can be a very good friend of yours, or the internet can be super scary. And so I learned. I went home that first night and started watching, videos and things and seeing stories and things like that, and got myself pretty scared within 10 minutes. And then I shut it down and I said, that's not Darren. That's not going to happen to Darren. And I never opened it up again. And so that was one of the major lessons that I carried with me throughout his other battles that he had as well.
Yeah, that's really powerful too. And I think we're learning more and more about the mind and the mindset that we have when we're entering into these battles and difficult situations. So I'm sure that was absolutely impactful in that journey.
It absolutely was. So when the cancer struck, and we were 38 years old, and so this is in 2009, and it was completely, again, side railed because very, very healthy. We were just kind of living our lives, very, very successful careers, kind of doing our own groovy kind of thing. And then he had strep throat, and then it just wouldn't go away. And so then he was diagnosed with stage 4 squamous cell carcinoma. And it was stage 4 because had hit his lymph nodes and they never found the primary. So he went through this, what I claim would be, if 50, 100 years down the road, they're gonna look back and say that that was barbaric in terms of the treatment. They did what they could do because they saved his life, but it was really, really excruciating. He lost 85 pounds. He had surgery, and then 6 weeks of chemo, and then 7 weeks of radiation, where he was going 5 days a week, and it knocked you to your knees. It knocked me to my knees, because managing all of that, again, we're in our late 30s at this point, and my walk with God wasn't as strong as it would get. It had gotten stronger through the other fire that we had been through. But there were some days I was so tired. I just never knew how tired a human being could be, because I was juggling all of that and work. And fortunately, he has the most lovely spirit about him, and he's strong in his faith also, and never complained and everything, but we were walking through it, and it was a big burden. And one day I just learned the phrase, God, give me enough manna for the day. I just need enough grace to get through today. And I started to say that at the beginning of the day, and at the end of the day, I would thank him for that grace. And that's what got me through it. It was an amazing journey, and living for only that day was truly one of the major lessons that I learned. The second lesson that I learned is we are get or done kind of folks. We are super high achievers, have kind of pulled up our bootstraps and gotten through life with a lot of God's blessings and a lot of hard work. And so asking people to help it doesn't come easily for me. And so around about halfway through the chemo, I had gotten a lot of comments. We have a lot of friends. We're very blessed with this huge network of support here in Houston. We don't have a lot of family in Houston. All of our family's back in Louisiana. And so I just kept telling people, just pray for us. We really need the prayers. That's going to get us through. And then finally, my uncle, one of his really good friends, called me up, and she's a cancer survivor. And she said, people are asking as much for them as they are for you. Let them be a part of your journey. It will help them to feel good about themselves, to help you. Mm-hmm. And it really changed my perspective about it. And I was just amazed how just open I was, how much help that we got. And people got super creative too. I had this set of friends that came on a Saturday and decorated our house for Christmas. It was beautiful because we spent that holiday together, just the two of us, and otherwise I wouldn't have had the energy to do it. And so it's just amazing what people will do if you allow them to help you.
In reading your book, I really gained that too. And I can tell you, I would be the exact same way at first. Like, nope, I'm good. Just pray. And I think that there's a lot of people in my community feel that way too. Like, we want to take care of things, and it's hard. It's hard to kind of swallow your pride and say, okay, yeah, I'll need a little help. Can you share some of the ways that, some of the kind of tangible, applicable ways that people helped you in any of these three situations? It sounds like you got a little bit more willing to have help when he was going through treatment. And then I know when, after Darren had the stroke, you even needed more help for an extended period of time. So what are some of the ways that people helped you with that?
So first off, it's knowing the timing, right? And so, and that's both for the caregiver as well as for the person offering. Sometimes, especially at the very, very beginning, you don't know what you need, or you're still in the hospital, and it could be as simple as, I need a meal because I forgot to eat. There's a vortex of time that if you're caring for a loved one, there would be spans of time, maybe 7-8 hours that would go by, and I had no idea. And they'd be like, have you eaten anything today? Well, it's just 11 o'clock. No, Dawn, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so having someone to kind of bring you something at the hospital, especially in those first days, is really, really important. I had some friends that delivered food, like groceries, to our house. at you because they knew I was coming home in the evening, and I just wanted. I hadn't been to the grocery store in 3 weeks, and so the simplest of those kinds of things is really really important. At the beginning in the cancer battle, it was people had a food train going, and I had another set of friends that have a lawn design and or an architecture lawn. There's a word for it. I'm not thinking of it now, but anyway, they have a maintenance part of their business as well. They sent their yard crew out to help us with our yard once a week, once a month, because we had a very small yard, and that was very very clever and everything else. But what I really learned when we got to the stroke, because that happened 2 days before Thanksgiving last year, and is making sure that you allow them to give in whatever area that they're most comfortable. And so it's almost catering your ask to your audience. So if you don't have any time and here's some areas like we need dog food and we need, stuff for the house, you can donate to our Amazon account. You can, we need to offset the cost for our yard crew, or wait until we're out of the hospital and I need help shuttling Darren back and forth to physical occupational speech therapy. And we use the Lotsa app. I have a friend of mine that was in Oklahoma that he wanted to do something. And I said, if you can help manage the app for me, and then you just send out notices for the people that have volunteered. So it took on a life of itself. And I was just amazed at how many people wanted to help in a variety of different ways. And it's just kind of opening up your heart and your house to them to allow you to do it. But knowing that sometimes you have to customize your ask to the different audiences, and knowing not just to kind of leave it carte blanche.
Oh, that's really good to know. Tell me about that app again. Lotsa?
Oh, Lotsa, Lotsa.
Okay.
And so, and it can help in terms of arranging like food to your house and things. We didn't need food as much as we needed help, because he was in the hospital and in inpatient rehab for 24 days. So all throughout December of last year. So we were spit out the other side, and I needed to get back to my consulting business. And so he was going to physical occupational speech therapy, sometimes 3-4 days a week. And so we had some of our friends that were willing to, pick him up at our house, bring him to therapy, wait for him there. They bring him to get a meal. This is before COVID, of course. And they bring him to, go and have breakfast or go and have whatever. And he got that interaction that he had in a safe space and was able, and then they would bring him home. And so that was really important to him to have other outside interaction also.
Yeah, I'm sure. One of the things that I loved about your book, Armored, is some of the just really applicable ways that you chose to encourage Darren. And I know, what was right for you all may not be right for everyone else. Like, one of the things that I loved is that you took pictures and hung them up all in the hospital. Talk to me a little bit about what some of those were and how they helped Darren in his recovery.
So Darren is we're both very, very visual kind of folks, but he's also a very high achiever, like I mentioned earlier. And so he needs a goal. And knowing his strengths, so I'm also a Gallup Clifton Strengths Finder coach, and so I knew my strengths, and then I knew his strengths also. And one of his strengths is context, and so he has to look back to look forward. And so innately, it's amazing how God whispers to you in just incredible kind of ways. So one morning, 5:30 in the morning, this is like day 3 after the stroke. He has no recollection of the first couple of weeks. He said it's just kind of this dream. He was not in, he was very, very sad because he just couldn't move any part of his right part of his body. The beginning, he couldn't even open up his right eye, and much less speak. And so I just had God planted this seed at 5:30 in the morning as I'm driving back to the hospital. And I just kept telling him that this is not your story. You are a warrior. You are determined. You are redeemed. You are forgiven. And when I got there, I noticed there was part of the whiteboard that the nurses used that he stared at every day that wasn't being used. So they wrote their phone number, or they wrote like little things about it, but there was a big piece of it that wasn't. So I started writing out all of these amazing things of reminding him who he is, and most of all that he's a child of God, right? And then it occurred to me that I needed to, rather than just letting him stare at this blank wall, because sound was really hard for him in the beginning too. So it wasn't like he even had the TV on. It was just this quiet space all day long where he just stared at a white wall. And so that evening, his mom was switching out with me. And so his mom came to the hospital, and I came back here at home to rest. And I printed out pictures of our lives, because we're big travelers, and pictures of our family and his son and his two grandkids and our big extended family. And then just statements reminding him of who he is overall, and Bible scriptures also. And just, I also had the idea, kind of that look back to look forward, to hang blank pieces of paper on the wall and document the milestone of the day. And so, and it could be something as small as, which was something as big as, I watched him that Sunday, 5 days after the stroke, his brain forced his index finger to wiggle for the first time. And it was the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen in my life. And I knew that we serve a miracle working God because of it. And so documenting all of that. So then a few days would go by, and then I would remind him, look, 2 days ago, you couldn't even get here with the walker. And so just encouraging him and coaching him in that kind of way gave me something to be able to do. Even though I know all this medical terminology right now, Amy, I am not a caregiver. I have no medical background whatsoever. In fact, I call myself the unintentional caregiver. If ever there was somebody you did not want taking care of you, it would be me, because I'm non-emotional, non-maternal. I lead with my brain, and I just plow myself through, and I deal with the emotions later. But it's always worked for us overall, because he doesn't like anyone to smother him too much or mother him too much. And so I just am there, just rallying him, almost this ambassador to get through into the other side.
Wow. Yeah, I bet you are a really good coach. I'm sitting here listening. I'm like, this is someone who's going to make you move. And I like that. But how great is that? And to me, I think that these are things that would be so helpful, but you, in the chaos and in the fog of the moment, I mean, what a blessing it was that God gave you these ideas, because I don't think that many people would I know I wouldn't come up with that, but how impactful that was.
Yeah. I had many of his nurses first off, they were amazed that I even thought to do it. The nurses and the doctors, like, who told you how to do that? And I'm like, yeah, this is me being who I am. This is what God wired me to do. And then the other piece of it is that they saw all these pictures of our lives. So it personalized him to them even more. So when they would come in, they would stare at the wall and say, oh, where was this? Or where was that? And so it gave us more of a personality and gave us more of this is us, and this is what we're working to get back to overall.
Oh, that is fantastic. I love that. That's fantastic. And I bet that I bet the healthcare staff too loved getting to know him on a more personal level than right there in the bed. And then, you coming in, and I bet that was really meaningful to them as well.
Yeah, here's the thing. You just don't know if you're not in a health battle. We have an aging population, and so a lot of times we're in the sandwich, generation overall, but we're young. I mean, Darren had his stroke at 48. And so being able to prepare yourself in this kind of way is really, really important, and not knowing what you're going to do. I talked to him 30 minutes before his stroke. He was completely fine. He worked out that morning before the stroke. And so, and on a dime, it happened. And here's the other bigger thing, is that know the warning signs of stroke. So my uncle lives with us, And the one who I mentioned earlier, his friend is the one who told me the lesson about helping others, letting others help us. And we thought that here's the amazing way that God works. I was thinking about this earlier this week. We thought we were helping my uncle with him, moving him in with us. And in reality, he saved my husband's life. And so that is the amazing way that God works. Because but for my uncle being at home, and because my husband was working at home, and he walked to the kitchen, wasn't acting right, couldn't articulate anything. My uncle kept saying, Darren, what's my name? What's your name? And Darren couldn't say it. Started slumping. My uncle helped him to the floor, called 911. The ambulance was at our house within 15 minutes. They got him to the hospital. There is a drug called TPA, saved my husband's life, but for that drug. So you have to make it to the hospital within a 2-hour window and get it in your system. And it's basically a blood clot buster there's a phrase for it, but that's the nickname, the clot buster. And so, but beyond 2 hours, the blood clot can go up in your brain and you can immediately die. And so that's why you have to get there within the first 2 hours. And so even with that, he had a lot of challenges recovering. I can't even imagine if he wouldn't have had the TPA in his system.
Wow. That's incredible. Well, so one of the things too that I thought was really unique and helpful and probably very in line with who you are is at the end of each chapter, you have key battle strategies and you have care coach questions. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about what each of those are? Because I feel like those, at the end of my podcast, I always say, what's the one simple thing I want you to remember? Because there's a lot of information and just kind of pulling it in and just like honing in. And so you do that with every single chapter, which I think is brilliant. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. And in the end of the book, I summarize my top 10 overall. Yeah. And there's just so many things, Amy, like that I learned through these major battles that we had, that I feel like it's incumbent upon me. God, we survived this. Yeah. We're on the other side. And it's not only to be an inspiration and a motivation, but it's also to educate as well. Because if I can help one person with their journey in any way, then it makes it all worthwhile in my heart. And so, like, for instance, one of the key battle strategies is usernames and passwords. And it's something as simple as that. And the lesson learned and I go through the whole story about how 2 weeks before the stroke, a friend of mine invited me to go to this financial planning luncheon. There was no reason for me to go to this luncheon other than I was going to support a friend who was supporting a friend. And the one nugget that I took away from this luncheon was this woman got up there and said, do you know the usernames and passwords of your loved ones? And I thought, Darren knows where my book is that has everything, but I don't think I know where he keeps all his usernames and passwords. So in one ear, out the other, complete fleeting thought, right? Why would we need,
of course,
48 years old. What would I need to know? Why did I have this, emergent issue to try to get that information immediately? 2 weeks later, the stroke happens. He can't articulate anything. I can't get in his phone. And when I could finally get in his phone, I couldn't get to some of the usernames. And there's a few accounts that I'm not on because we got married at 33. And so there's just a few accounts that I wasn't listed on. I had to execute our PO, our power of attorney. And even with that, I had to know, like I had to have a really good banking relationship. I say all of that to say the lesson learned in that is listen to the God whisper. That's the lesson learned for that one. And then the care coach question is, do you know your loved ones' usernames and passwords? And I have told the story, so many times in the last year, and people are like, thank you so much. I have no idea. I'm like, look, I found out 3 months later, we went to get him a new phone. I found out that he had a password keeper that entire time. And he was like, I'm sorry. And I said, I mean, no, don't apologize. I'm like, but I joked with him. I'm like, you have that the whole time. And he's like, oh, sorry. And so we joke around a lot. And honestly, it's the laughter that gets you through a lot of this overall, because if you don't have some kind of sense of humor in the middle of it, you would drive yourself crazy.
Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine. Yeah. So laughter was really important to you. And I know your relationship with Jesus was really important. Talk to me a little bit about that relationship, about your faith, because anytime we are going through a challenge like that, our faith is going to change in one way or another.
So it got stronger. And so, I hear that relationships like marriages, even whatever relationships in these fires of battles of hell will go one of two directions. It will either make you stronger or will break you apart. And I think the same is with your relationship with God too. Is it, and for me, and I'm so thankful, is that it got stronger. And when life just brought me to my knees, and it did bring me to my knees many times, I just knew that I knew that I knew that I could call upon him. And the area where I always kind of got tripped up was when I tried to take things into my own hands. And when I released and instead called upon, and sometimes I didn't have the prayers. I had to reach out to my prayer sisters, like you mentioned, Forward at the very beginning. I'm in a Bible study through Forward and I have been for almost 10 years now. And we celebrate the highs and we're there with one another in the lows. And those wonderful women gave me the words and the prayers that I didn't have the energy or even the mental capacity for, when all I could say was, Lord, please. Mm-hmm. And, but I knew he was always there. That's the amazing thing in all of this. And Darren had a setback. And so he was in the stroke recovery. Then he was in ICU for 6 days, in the hospital for a few days. They released him to inpatient rehab. And then he had, we didn't know that he had a bleeding ulcer in the middle of it that was reacted to the Plavix and aspirin. And started bleeding blood, and so much vomiting of blood. And his blood pressure dropped to 80/45. And never in any of the horrific things that I have seen with my husband did I ever think that I was going to lose him. And that day I thought that I was going to lose him. And at some pieces of it, I wanted, and just complete transparency, Amy, I wanted to take it in my own hands. I didn't think he was getting the level of care that he could get, or there was just all these things. And it wasn't until I released it to God and I really said, there's too many people watching. I know that Darren is going to overcome this, because we had thousands of people praying for us all across the world. And I'm like, he is overcoming, and he is a warrior on your behalf, and will overcome this as a testimony to you and your goodness to him overall. And he did. It's just the amazing. And I have goosebumps even talking about it.
Wow. Yeah. That's your ability to take yourself kind of out of where you were and almost like you can just see the God in it. And I think you had some sort of God-given clarity with a lot that I think is really hard to get, even when we're not in situations as dire as that, but just being able to step away and say, God's got this. And yeah, like I love how you said there's too many people watching. Yeah. For God not to be moving in the way, and showing his work. That's really incredible. Okay. So one of the things that I related to was your story about the drill sergeant in your head. Tell everybody listening a little bit about, by the way, you called the drill sergeant a her. I would have called it a man personally.
No, it's her. She's not, I say personalities, and people think I don't have multiple personalities, don't get me wrong, but she's one of those personas inside that it's that voice that's constantly there. And so we can either use that voice for good, or that voice can be very, very, and I think and I know it's the enemy that's trying to attack us. And so there has to be some self-awareness about it. And so, again, when we were back home after the stroke, I was so tired. I was just, I had used and depleted every bit of energy to fight for this man. And when I got word that my 210-pound Christmas gift could come home, it was the best thing ever. So we got home the 20th of December, and just, we pitched a tent in our bed basically for 3 days and just kind of huddled with our pups, and it was fantastic. And but when January occurred and I needed to get back to work, I was so hard on myself. And because I was so tired, I had no ability to have that self-awareness that I've gotten better at being about overall. And so one of the pinnacles of that came to a head was I was in a client meeting, and never in my 28-year career have I ever not been completely on for my clients. And I caught myself falling asleep in this meeting.
Oh.
And they're very kind. They didn't notice, or they say they didn't notice, but I just know that I was falling asleep in this meeting. And then I got home and completely berated myself in my head. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? How can you do this? And I had all these things playing out in my head. And then blessedly, I had my Bible study that Wednesday morning, and we usually met in person every Wednesday. No one ever called in. So this is obviously before COVID. We're in the middle of January at this point. And I reached out to the leader and I said, I can't physically get there, but I need to be with y'all. And can I call in? And she said, oh yeah, all day. Just call in. And then I broke down in a safe space. And I said, I don't know what's wrong with me. And my sisters in Christ basically were like, you have PTSD. Can you cut yourself some slack a little bit? And I felt so much better after that. And then again, God whispered to me that Thursday morning, I woke up and I wanted to go through my head. And I said, no, this is not, I'm not going to do this again. And I need to be nicer to myself. And then I envisioned that the voice was the drill sergeant who was just constantly tapping me on the top of the shoulder saying, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. So I actually created this vision of myself flicking her off of my shoulder and just saying, no, stop. And because then the reality is, and I think Dr. Joyce Myers is the one, I've later heard her say this, somewhere in my subconscious, I had it overall, but we wouldn't talk to someone we love and a close friend sometimes the way that we talk to ourselves. So either that or they wouldn't love us anymore. So why are we talking to ourselves that way? And so having some self-awareness about it, to catch myself whenever I was doing it, was truly, it was the healthier choice. And I'm so glad I did it. And I haven't done it again since January, but it's always being able to have that being conscientious of it overall.
Yeah. I think that visual too has got to be really helpful, because it's almost, even if you're not actually taking an action, you can visualize the action of flicking that off the shoulder. And I think even just something like that, even though it's simple and probably sounds a little silly, I have to think that's really helpful as well.
Absolutely.
What do you wish every partner knew when they are helping a loved one through a traumatic event?
I think two things. One is to know and to get permission from your loved one in terms of what motivates them, and to get them to allow you to push them if you feel like they can be pushed in a certain area. And when I say push, I mean gently, right? Coach, sure. Motivated, whatever word you're using overall. So then that way, because you sometimes see the potential in someone else that we don't even see in ourselves, right? And so it's being able to know and get that permission early on in terms of knowing your partner so well that you know what they're going to respond to positively and negatively overall. So that's one thing in terms of the prepping. And the other one is allowing each of you to have the freedom to be whatever you're going to be next, beyond wherever that illness, battle, whatever you call it, is.
Yeah. Can you go into that a little bit more in depth? Because you share a really special story in the book about that. And I thought uh, that was really impactful.
It was one of those major stories that completely turned everything on its head for me in a very positive way. It really blew it wide open. So again, get her done kind of folks, where I spit out the other side, and Darren couldn't speak. So he recovered physically just because he's worked out his entire life, eating really, really well. I knew that the physical part of him was going to come back faster than the speech piece of it did. And so he's always in there, right? And so there's something called aphasia, whereby the wires from the brain to the mouth and the brain to the hands just don't work. It's just like the brain is just this amazing thing. It gets rewired after a stroke, and give it enough time and it can rewire itself overall. But at that point in January, he was having a hard time even articulating. And so when he was still in inpatient rehab, one of my work colleagues through my network actually volunteered his mom, who is this retired speech pathologist. And he said, if any time you would want to talk to her about something to get a perspective from somebody on the outside, know that she's a resource. I know she would do it for you. And so I reached out to her in January, and so one rainy Saturday morning, I got on the phone with her and I said, so here's all the information about us. Here's our age. Here's what all this other stuff. When are we going to get there? And and she said, what? And I mean, it was that naive, right? I'm like, well, when's he going to be Darren again? And she was I am so thankful for people that are that blunt with me, right? And she said, honey, she said, I don't know you. And she said, but the way you're looking at it is all wrong. And I went, okay, what? And she said, he will never be who he was before the stroke, just like you aren't who you were before his stroke. So can you have the freedom to be who you're going to be next? It was amazing. It took this load off, like, oh, we can recreate ourselves. He can be whoever he wants to be on the other side of this. So I got off the phone with her and I had this epiphany, and I was like, you can be whoever you want to be next. And he just looked at me like, what are you even talking about? And then I slowly started to explain it to him, like, because he's a private equity banker, very, very technical kind of job. So the constraints of being able to add that layer of stress is not what he needed by any means in those months, especially the months of COVID. We didn't even know that was coming. And so just throttling back and giving him the space to create whoever we don't know who that's going to be. He's still figuring it out. I'm still figuring it out. And so, but it's this amazing journey in and of itself that kind of really took all of the strings off of it, which has made it so much more enjoyable to be in this space.
Yeah, freeing too. That's the word that comes to mind. Like, okay, we're just going to see how this works out, rather than trying to have this unattainable goal of being, where he used to be. So how is he now?
Oh, he's so lovely.
I wish people could see your smile right now. Oh my gosh. It's so big.
We are sitting here, and I don't know if you ever allowed the date. So we're sitting here 2 days before the date of the anniversary of his stroke, and yesterday we had the 1 year annual exam by his neurologist. The neurologist could not be more pleased with where he is in his and I say in quotes recovery process, because I've rephrased that term recovery in my head. It means so much of a different thing to me overall. I am so thankful for every single day that I have with that man. And there are so many blessings, because what I've been told is the part of the brain that it affected, it's where everything is knit together. So it's like the central repository of the brain. And so if ever there's an area that you don't want to have a stroke, it's in that area. And so they're really amazed that he's even done what he's done overall. And the other piece of it is when people come out typically of having this type of stroke, they have a tendency, been known, their personalities change so much that they can be mean even. And he's just sweeter. He's always been this kind and loving, animal loving man. And he is just even kinder and more gentle than he ever was. The words are getting there. He can drive now, and he still deals a lot with stamina, and so his momentum and whatnot gets, I can see it on his face if he needs to go and rest. But he gets up every morning and he has some project that he wants to work on in the house. It can be as small as, we need to caulk all the windows because, winter in Houston is coming, walking around the house with a caulking gun. And so it's these little projects that he just gives himself to do that, allow him to check the box that he accomplished something for that day. And so people often ask me, how do you stay so motivated? How do you stay so positive? I'm like, it's kind of like NASCAR. He's the pace car. If he's not moping, what do I have to mope about? Right.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
I am so blessed with his attitude, because he has this, he's never going to stop fighting. It just makes me, I'm inspired. I'm inspired every single day by that man.
Oh, he sounds wonderful. And I can just tell you guys make a great team, work really well together. And, I love your story. I love your story. And the other thing too, that we didn't really talk about here, but I would love for people to, they will get it when they read the book, but the love story between the two of you too, and that how it started so early, and that it's just threaded through. And so I'm so happy for you all, even though I know it has not been an easy road.
Yeah, it's so funny because I didn't start off to write a love story by any means. It's it's our story, but it wasn't a love story. But I get more people that read the book and that are like, "This is a love story, Dawn." I'm like, "Well, it's not. Yeah, it's our story. It's not meant to be mushy or saccharine or anything else, but it's absolutely true. It's this beautiful story of two friends that found each other and were friends for 3 years, and then ultimately started dating and fell in love, and all this other wonderful things. And then we had a lot of life that happened around.
The things you don't expect when you're first starting out, for sure. Well, I'm really glad to hear he's doing well. I wish I could have taken a picture of that smile when I asked that, because you just lit up the entire screen. So I'm really happy for you all. I know you have a lot to be thankful for this Thanksgiving, for sure. Okay.
One more thing really quick, Amy.
Yes.
The thing that I like to leave everyone with is, don't take one single hug or I love you for granted. Take everyone in, because you don't know when it's going to be the last.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good reminder for me as well. Okay, I have two more questions that are totally different from each other. The first is one I've been asking a lot of my guests lately, and I am fascinated by tattoos. I don't have any, but I have found when people have them and I ask about them, oftentimes there are some really incredible stories that go along with that. So I was wondering if you had any tattoos, if you would share a story with it. And if you don't have one, but you had to get one, what would you get and where would you put it?
I do not have any tattoos, primarily because I hate needles. And so if I had to have a tattoo, it would have to be one of those Cracker Jack box kind of that are the I like the henna, the beautiful henna designs that are really prevalent in the Indian culture. And so, yeah, but I think those will wash off also. So I don't know what that says about me. It says that you do not want me caring for you, is what it.
That's okay. That's all right. And then the other question I have is, I know you are a faithful servant of Jesus. Do you have a meaningful Bible verse you would like to share with us?
So I lean on Ephesians 6:11-18, and that's really how Armored came about. And it's putting on the full armor. And I'm not, I don't have the full Bible verse memorized, but it's every piece of it. I'm a visual learner in that respect, because I think that whether it's, the helmet of salvation or the breastplate or the shoes or whatever it is that you walk through in life, it is preparing you. And I really believe that Ephesians 6:11-18 actually demonstrates that the most. It has for me in my story overall.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously that is very impactful for you because you named it your book, Armored by Dawn F. Landry. Dawn, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us. I have to imagine when you share it over and over, that can be traumatic again. It can also at the same time give you hope again. And so just thank you for walking through that with us and sharing not only your experience, but also some of these really applicable things that we can take and use in our own lives with our own loved ones.
Yeah, I will tell you, I love telling the story because what it does is it reminds me of the memorial stones that I stand on of God's goodness to us. Because sometimes we get in our day-to-day lives. Now, I'm so close to God, everything that He's done this last year. So I stand on it very, very closely now. But I'll tell you, before the stroke, we were, year 9, 10, post cancer. And some of those days you have to get up and you have to remind yourself of everything that God has done before. So if you know those memorial stones where but for your relationship and the walk that you have with the Holy Spirit, that you would not be there, then stand on those, write those down overall. And so I love talking about it because it's always that reminder that I have of He did it for us in the past. He promises that He will do it for us in the future.
Amen. Oh, that's fantastic. All right. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Amy.
What a story, right? Oh my gosh. I have to admit, I don't know how Dawn was able to do all of that on top of her work schedule. But to me, that's just a testament to the scripture from Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Hey, I will have the link to Armored in the show notes. Please go get that. I think it'll be a great read for you. I know I learned so much. Also, don't forget to get your download, How to Enjoy Shame-Free Health by Breaking 8 Rules at gracedhealth.com/bad rules. Also, is there someone you know whom today's conversation might serve? I know a lot of us are dealing with our own caregiving situation, particularly right now in this COVID era. If so, share this with them or on social media. That really helps out the show. And if you haven't subscribed to the show, I invite you to just click that button so you can find your own Graced Health each week. Yes, I'm super cheesy that way. What's the one simple thing I want you to remember? This is something I try and offer in all of my episodes because we get a lot of information and I try to boil it down to one simple thing. That is, listen to those God whispers. I don't know about you, but it can be really easy to just brush those off and let our head talk us out of the things that we're just kind of feeling really so slightly in our heart. But Dawn and Darren's story really convicts me of the importance of paying attention to those. Okay, that is all for today. Go out there and have a graced day.